Just as I reached for the handle of the restaurant manager's office, he clamped his hand firmly around my wrist. He locked the door behind us, and in the dim light of the security monitors, his face was ashen. "Please, ma'am, you need to be strong," he whispered, his voice strained. "Promise me you won't scream or pass out when you see this footage. What your husband did in this video, it's going to change everything." My heart hammered against my ribs as his words sent a chilling premonition down my spine, and in that moment, I knew my perfect life was about to shatter into a million pieces. But before we dive into that chilling moment, I want to know where you're joining me from. Drop your city and state in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Your support helps this channel bring more incredible stories like this one to light. That night, the atmosphere inside the five-star restaurant on New York's Upper East Side was practically humming with warmth and elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow that danced across the polished porcelain plates and shimmering wine glasses. Tucked away in a private corner booth, 4 people sat, looking for all the world like the happiest family imaginable. Their laughter, light and clear, occasionally broke through the soft melody of a string quartet playing in the background. I was Emily, and I was sitting next to my husband, Alex. I wore a designer dress in a soft pastel shade that felt both sophisticated and understated. My face, I'm sure, was radiating pure joy, though if you looked closely, you might have seen the faint lines of exhaustion under my eyes. This wasn't just any night. We were celebrating our 3rd wedding anniversary. It was also a quiet celebration of gratitude, because my health had finally started to improve. For the past month, I'd been plagued by debilitating headaches and dizzy spells, but they were finally beginning to subside. Across the table sat Mrs. Davis, Alex's mother, and a young woman named Jessica, who had been introduced to me years ago as Alex's adoptive sister from childhood. Mrs. Davis was beaming, her eyes fixed on me with a look that seemed to overflow with affection. She was dressed to the nines in her best pantsuit, with a little too much gold jewelry flashing on her wrists. Jessica, seated beside her, appeared just as cheerful, dutifully topping off my wine glass every few minutes with a polite and helpful air. And Alex, my handsome, charming Alex, couldn't keep his eyes off me. He carefully cut the steak on my plate into small, manageable bites, just the way I liked it. Every gesture, every touch, was a public declaration of a deep and abiding love that would make any woman envious. I truly felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I had inherited a massive corporation from my late father, and now I had a husband who not only cherished me but loved me for who I was, not for the fortune attached to my name. Alex gently stroked the back of my hand, his voice a low murmur as he asked if the food was to my liking. I nodded enthusiastically, a sweet smile on my lips. The food was divine, I told him, but it was the company of my loved ones that made the evening truly perfect. Mrs. Davis chimed in with a chorus of praise, telling me what a wonderful wife I was and how I deserved every happiness in the world. Jessica added that she deeply admired the harmony in our home. The evening flew by, and before we knew it, dinner was over. As the waiter cleared our plates, Alex immediately produced his credit card to settle the bill, waving away my attempt to reach for my wallet. He always insisted that, as the head of the household, it was his responsibility to cover our dinners out. It was a sweet, if slightly silly, gesture. Everyone knew his personal wealth was a drop in the bucket compared to my inheritance, but it was that sense of old-fashioned responsibility that made me love him all the more. Once the bill was paid, we made our way to the valet. The late-night New York air was surprisingly brisk. Without a moment's hesitation, Alex slipped off his blazer and draped it over my shoulders, ensuring I wouldn't catch a chill. Mrs. Davis and Jessica walked ahead, arm in arm, their soft laughter floating back to us. When our black sedan pulled up, Alex held the door for me, treating me like a princess. The drive started just as the dinner had ended, filled with light-hearted chatter and laughter. But about 15 minutes later, as we were about to merge onto the FDR Drive, a jolt of panic shot through me. My hands flew to my lap, then patted the empty seat beside me. The joyful expression on my face vanished, replaced by a mask of alarm. I realized my designer leather purse was gone. It held my phone, my wallet, and several important identification cards I never went anywhere without. My voice trembled as I told Alex I'd left it at the restaurant. He calmly pulled the car over to the shoulder, reassuring me it was no problem and that he would turn around immediately. But then I glanced at the dashboard clock and looked into the back seat. I saw Mrs. Davis, her head resting against the window, already looking drowsy and tired from the long evening. I felt a pang of guilt. I couldn't bear the thought of making my mother-in-law spend another hour on the road because of my carelessness. I made a quick decision. I would go back to the restaurant myself in an Uber. I told Alex to take his mother and Jessica home first, and then he could either swing back to pick me up or just wait for me at our townhouse. Alex protested at first, insisting he should come with me, but I was firm. The restaurant was perfectly safe, I argued, and it would only take me a minute to retrieve my bag. Reluctantly, he agreed. He ordered an Uber for me on his phone and waited with me until it arrived, seeing me off like the perfect, caring husband he was. In the back of the Uber, my mind was racing. I felt foolish for being so forgetful, but I couldn't help but smile, thinking about how thoughtful Alex had been. I was so grateful to have a man who respected his mother so deeply. I started daydreaming about our future, imagining that soon we might be blessed with a child to complete our perfect little family. The car pulled up to the curb in front of the restaurant's grand entrance. It was much quieter now. Most of the decorative lights had been turned off, a sign that they were nearing closing time. I hurried inside, hoping my purse was still sitting by our table, untouched. I was heading toward our corner booth when a middle-aged man in a crisp suit suddenly appeared in my path. It was Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager who had greeted us so warmly upon our arrival. But this time, his expression was completely different. The friendly smile and welcoming nod were gone. His face was tense, pale, and his eyes held a look of profound seriousness. I could see beads of sweat on his temples. He stopped directly in front of me, blocking my way. Before I could even ask about my purse, he took hold of my arm. His grip was polite but surprisingly strong, as if he were bracing me for a fall. In a low, trembling voice, he apologized for his forwardness, but stressed that there was something incredibly urgent I needed to know, right now. I was completely bewildered and tried to pull away, asking him where my purse was. He ignored the question. Instead, he guided me toward a door next to the host stand that was marked Manager's Office. Fear began to creep in. I thought perhaps there had been a robbery or something terrible had happened, but Mr. Thompson's piercing gaze convinced me to comply. We stepped into the small office. The walls were lined with monitors displaying CCTV footage from every angle of the restaurant. He immediately locked the door from the inside. The sound of the key turning in the lock made my heart pound like a drum. I took an instinctive step back, on high alert. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why did you lock me in here?" Mr. Thompson took a deep, steadying breath before he spoke, his eyes locking onto mine. He told me he had to show me something the security camera had recorded at my table. He urged me to pray, to find my strength, and to promise I wouldn't scream or faint when I saw what was on that screen. He said that what I was about to witness would completely upend my entire understanding of the people I had just shared a meal with. With a hand that shook slightly, he clicked a button on his computer keyboard. I stood frozen in front of his desk, my eyes glued to the largest monitor in the center of the wall. The screen flickered to life, showing a high-definition recording of Table 12, the very table where my family and I had been sitting just 20 minutes earlier. In the top corner of the monitor, a timestamp showed the exact moment just before they had left the restaurant. Mr. Thompson explained in a low voice that he'd been doing a routine check of the cameras when his eyes caught some suspicious movement at their table. He told me to watch closely, to focus on the moment I had excused myself to go to the ladies' room to freshen up before heading home. On the screen, my chair was empty. Only Alex, Mrs. Davis, and Jessica remained at the table. At first, their conversation seemed normal, but a few seconds after my back disappeared from the camera's view, Alex's entire demeanor shifted. The warm, loving smile that was always on his face vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. He glanced left and right, making sure no waiters were watching their table. I held my breath, watching as my husband's hand shot out and grabbed my purse from the table. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. I saw Alex open the bag with a practiced skill, as if he knew the location of every item inside by heart. He pulled out a small white bottle. I recognized it immediately. It was my bottle of iron supplements, the ones my doctor had prescribed for the dizzy spells I'd been having. On the monitor, Alex twisted open the cap. Without a shred of hesitation, he tipped the bottle and emptied the entire contents, my real supplements, onto a paper napkin he had ready in his lap. Then, he crumpled the napkin with the real pills inside and shoved it deep into his blazer pocket. Once the bottle was empty, Alex reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a small plastic baggie filled with other pills, their shape and color nearly identical to my supplements. With a swift, fluid motion, he poured the strange pills into my now empty bottle. He screwed the cap back on, gave it a gentle shake to make it look normal, and placed it back in my purse in the exact same position as before. The entire process took less than a minute. I clamped my hand over my mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to escape. Tears began to burn my eyes, but I forced myself to keep watching. The most painful part came next. I saw Mrs. Davis, the woman I had cherished like my own mother, watch Alex's every move. Instead of stopping him or looking shocked, she covered her mouth as a silent, shaking laugh convulsed her body. Then, she did something that made my blood run cold. The older woman tilted her head back, rolled her eyes into her head, and began waving her hands erratically, mimicking the movements of someone mentally unhinged. Mrs. Davis pointed at my empty chair, continuing her cruel pantomime of a madwoman. Jessica, the sweet, adoptive sister, leaned in close to Alex's ear. While the CCTV footage was silent, her lip movements and triumphant expression showed her complete support. I even saw her pat Alex's shoulder with pride, as if congratulating him on a job well done. The three of them then raised their glasses in a discreet, celebratory toast, just moments before I reappeared from the direction of the restroom. The video ended. The monitor went black. Mr. Thompson's office was plunged into a terrifying silence, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioner and my own ragged breathing. I felt my world collapsing. My legs gave out from under me, and I nearly crumpled to the floor, saved only by my desperate grip on the edge of the heavy wooden desk. I felt sick, betrayed in the most vile way imaginable. The husband, mother-in-law, and sister-in-law whom I loved and supported were a pack of wolves in sheep's clothing. Mr. Thompson quickly slid a chair behind me and urged me to sit. He then opened a drawer and placed a small bottle on the desk in front of me. It was my original bottle of supplements. He explained that after my family left, he immediately instructed his staff to check the trash cans in the men's restroom, because he'd seen Alex go in there just before leaving. They found the crumpled napkin, filled with my real pills. Mr. Thompson then spoke in a serious tone. He told me he had a degree in pharmacy before he changed careers to restaurant management. He explained that the pills Alex had put in my bottle weren't a fast-acting poison. They were a type of illegal drug, a powerful psychotropic. He said the drug had horrific side effects if taken regularly by a healthy person. The effects included visual and auditory hallucinations, extreme anxiety, paranoia, confusion, and even a complete loss of one's grip on reality. Mr. Thompson emphasized that their goal wasn't to kill me, but to make me appear insane. The dizziness and headaches I'd been experiencing over the last month were likely the initial effects of them slipping small doses of the drug into my food or drinks at home. I sat in stunned silence, processing everything. The strange occurrences of the past few weeks suddenly started to make a horrifying kind of sense. I would often hear faint whispers at night that I dismissed as my imagination. I would sometimes feel like I saw shadows moving in the corners of rooms. I was constantly forgetting where I put things. It turns out, it wasn't an illness at all. It was a chemical manipulation, fed to me by the man who slept beside me every night. Alex wanted to drive me mad, and I knew why. If I were declared mentally incompetent, either medically or legally, then the control over all of my assets, my father's company, my inheritance, would fall to my closest guardian, to my husband. They wanted to get rid of me and live off my fortune without ever having to become murderers. The plan was as brilliant as it was evil. Suddenly, my phone, which I'd set on the desk, buzzed loudly. The name My Husband lit up the screen, accompanied by a smiling profile picture of Alex. I stared at the phone with a look of pure hatred and disgust. I didn't want to answer. I wanted to run, to scream, to call the police right then and there. But Mr. Thompson placed a restraining hand on mine as I went to reject the call. He shook his head gently, advising me not to be reckless. If I confronted them now, without a solid plan, they could easily deny everything. They could destroy the evidence, and I, already under the influence of the drugs they'd been giving me, would easily be dismissed as hysterical or having an episode. My word against theirs would mean nothing without more concrete proof. Mr. Thompson told me to answer the phone and act as normal as I possibly could. He urged me to begin the performance of my life. I had to pretend I knew nothing. I had to let them believe their plan was working perfectly. That was the only way I could gather more evidence and turn the tables on them when the time was right. I took a shaky breath, roughly wiped the tears from my face, and adjusted my voice so it wouldn't sound hoarse. I pressed the green icon on the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Alex's voice came through, dripping with a fake concern that now sounded utterly repulsive. He asked if I had found my purse and if I needed him to come pick me up. I answered in a voice I made sound a little weak, but calm. I told him the purse had turned up, that I'd left it at the front desk. I said I was waiting for a ride home and told him not to worry. I hung up quickly, before my emotions could betray me. I looked at Mr. Thompson and gave him a firm nod. He handed me the bottle of real supplements, telling me to keep it as comparative evidence. He also reminded me to take the bottle from my purse, the one filled with the psychotropic drugs, but to never, ever take one. I took my purse, which Mr. Thompson had secured in his desk. I clutched it to my chest, not because I was afraid of losing my things, but because it now felt like a shield. That night, I walked out of Mr. Thompson's office, no longer a naive, trusting wife. I walked out with a fire of rage burning in my chest, carefully hidden behind a mask of calm. The war had begun, and I swore I would not let them win. I was returning to the house that now felt like a nest of vipers, ready to play my part in this deadly performance. The Uber carrying me pulled up to the wrought iron gate of the 2-story townhouse that had been my home with Alex. The building looked stately and warm, with a small, manicured garden out front, a perfect picture of the success and marital bliss we projected to the world. But to me, tonight, it no longer felt like a home or a safe harbor. It was a giant stage, cold and dark, littered with traps waiting to swallow me whole. I paid the driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath to steady the frantic rhythm of my heart. I had to go in there. I had to face the people who wanted to destroy me and pretend I didn't know a thing. I let myself in with my spare key. The living room was quiet, the main lights dimmed to a soft, warm glow. Alex emerged from the kitchen, a wide, welcoming smile plastered on his face, as if no crime had been committed just hours earlier. He wrapped me in a warm hug, a gesture that once made me feel cherished, but now sent shivers of pure disgust down my spine. He asked in his softest tones if I felt calmer now that I had my purse back. I forced a weak smile onto my lips, which felt stiff and unnatural. I nodded slowly, telling him I was just a little tired from the trip back and forth. Alex immediately guided me to the sofa. With practiced ease, he picked up a glass of lukewarm water that was already waiting on the coffee table, right next to the very bottle of supplements I had seen in the security footage. He took the bottle, shook one of the pills into his palm, and offered it to me. "You should take your vitamin," he said, his voice dripping with affection, "so your head won't hurt tomorrow morning." He reminded me, with that same caring tone, that my health was his #1 priority. I stared at the small pill in his hand. That tiny object was the weapon my husband was using to slowly, methodically steal my sanity. With a swift and careful movement, I brought the glass to my lips. I popped the pill into my mouth, but I didn't swallow it. I expertly tucked it under my tongue. Then I took a long drink of water, enough to convince Alex that I'd swallowed the medication. He watched my every move, his eyes fixed on my throat, making sure his evil concoction went down. After seeing the empty glass, he smiled with satisfaction and stroked my hair, praising his obedient wife. I immediately excused myself to go to our master bedroom, claiming I needed to rest. As soon as I was in the attached bathroom, I spit the pill into a tissue and flushed it down the toilet. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes burned with a fierce new determination. I could not afford to be weak. I left the bathroom and got into bed, pretending to close my eyes. A few minutes later, Alex came in, kissed my forehead briefly, and whispered, "Good night." He then slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone in the darkness. I waited for 10 minutes, making sure he wouldn't return. Then, I rose silently from the bed. My thoughts raced back to the strange things I'd experienced over the past month. Nearly every night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I would hear soft whispers calling my name, the sound of a baby crying, or faint murmurs from an unclear source. Those sounds were what woke me up, drenched in a cold sweat, giving Alex and Mrs. Davis more ammunition to insist I was stressed out or even being haunted. Tonight, I was determined to find the source. I switched on my phone's flashlight and began to search every corner of the bedroom. I checked under the bed, inside the wardrobe, even the air conditioning vents. Nothing. My gaze then fell upon a large, ornate painting of a serene landscape that hung on the wall directly across from my bed. It had been a gift from Mrs. Davis 2 months ago. I walked over to it. Carefully, I lifted the heavy frame off the wall. My wildest suspicion was confirmed. Taped to the back of the wooden frame was a small, square black object with a tiny red indicator light blinking faintly. It was a mini wireless speaker. The device was stuck on with strong adhesive, hidden perfectly from view. My blood boiled. The ghostly whispers that had been tormenting me weren't a product of a sick mind. They were recordings, played on a timer by my own husband through this device. He was deliberately disrupting my sleep to create the illusion of auditory hallucinations. I took a picture of the speaker as evidence, then placed the painting back in its original position so Alex wouldn't suspect a thing. But my search wasn't over. I heard faint voices drifting up from downstairs. Tiptoeing, barefoot, I slipped out of the bedroom. I crept down the stairs, carefully avoiding the wooden steps I knew tended to creak. The house was dark, but a sliver of light escaped from the family room. The sound of Alex and Jessica talking grew clearer as I approached. My heart was pounding, terrified of being discovered, but I had to know what they were saying. I hid behind the partition wall between the living room and the family room. Through a gap in a decorative bookshelf, I could see Alex and Jessica sitting side by side on the sofa. They were close, far closer than adoptive siblings should ever be. Jessica's head was resting intimately on Alex's shoulder, while his hand stroked her hair. The sight made me want to vomit. This betrayal was so much deeper, so much filthier than I had ever imagined. They weren't just co-conspirators in a plot for my fortune. They were having an affair right under my roof. I heard Alex chuckle softly and say that I had already taken my nightly dose. He said that by tomorrow, during the big company board meeting, the drug's effect would be at its peak, especially after I took the morning dose. Alex boasted that I would undoubtedly make a fool of myself in front of all the shareholders, giving him the perfect, undeniable reason to have me committed. Jessica's voice was syrupy sweet as she asked how much longer they had to pretend to be siblings. She confessed how tired she was of acting polite in front of me, a woman she considered dumb and naive. She said she couldn't wait to be the true lady of the house and ship me off to a mental institution in upstate New York. She had even already planned a European vacation for them next month, using my company's money, as soon as Alex secured power of attorney over my assets. Alex soothed her, kissing the top of her head and promising it would all be over in less than 24 hours. He assured her that I had no one else to turn to. My parents were gone, and I trusted them completely. I recorded their entire disgusting conversation using the voice memo app on my phone. My hands trembled as I fought to contain my overflowing rage. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they were no longer tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated hatred. I knew now that not a single person in this house was on my side. I was alone in a den of thieves, but that knowledge gave me a strange, new strength. I stopped the recording and crept slowly back to my room. I climbed into bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and stared at the dark ceiling. I would not sleep tonight. Tonight, I would plot my counterattack. Tomorrow morning, the real war would begin. The morning sun sliced through the gaps in the bedroom curtains, waking me from a night I'd spent wide awake. My eyes felt heavy, but my mind was as sharp as a razor's edge. I heard the sound of the shower running in the master bathroom. It was time to begin my counteroffensive. I let out a soft groan and clutched my head, pretending to wake up in a state of confusion. I sat on the edge of the bed, deliberately letting my body sway a little, my face a mask of bewilderment and vacancy. Alex, fresh from his shower, saw me and immediately rushed over, his face a perfect picture of feigned concern. He asked in a worried, yet utterly false, tone how I was feeling. I answered in a hoarse whisper, complaining that my head felt incredibly heavy and that I could still hear the faint echoes of last night's whispers. Alex expertly hid a cunning smile and nodded sympathetically. He suggested it was probably because I was overtired and should rest at home until noon. He also reminded me not to forget my morning medicine, which he had already placed on the nightstand. I nodded obediently. After he watched me take the pill using the same trick of hiding it under my tongue, Alex said his goodbyes. He was off to take Mrs. Davis to the farmer's market and then run a few errands. He promised he'd be back before lunch to help me get ready for the afternoon board meeting. A wave of relief washed over me as I heard his car pull out of the driveway. As soon as he was gone, I sprang from the bed. The dizzy, fragile act vanished in an instant. I grabbed my phone and called James, the sharp young lawyer who had worked for my late father and had helped me with the company's legal affairs. I spoke quickly and firmly, telling him to come to my house immediately and to use the back entrance so he wouldn't be seen by any neighbors or by Jessica, who I thought might still be in her room. As luck would have it, Jessica had left with Alex and his mother, probably to celebrate their impending victory. The house was completely empty, giving me a golden opportunity. Less than 30 minutes later, James arrived, his face etched with worry. I led him straight to Alex's private office, a room that was always kept locked. I knew where Alex hid the spare key, inside a decorative planter at the end of the hall. We slipped inside. The room was a mess of paperwork. I went directly to the small safe tucked in the corner. I remembered once seeing Alex punch in a code, and I had a hunch it was his mother's birthday. I tried the numbers. A soft click echoed in the silent room. The safe door swung open. What we found inside made James gasp. It was a stack of documents, irrefutable proof of Alex's crimes. James found the draft of the legal petition to have me declared incompetent. It stated that I was suffering from a severe mental disorder, rendering me legally unfit to manage my affairs, and therefore all my assets, including my voting rights in the company, were to be handed over to my husband, Alex. There was even a forged statement from a psychiatrist claiming I had paranoid schizophrenia. Beyond the legal papers, I found bank books and records of suspicious transactions. James examined them closely, discovering evidence of massive fund transfers from the company's accounts into personal accounts belonging to Mrs. Davis and Jessica. The transfers were disguised as payments to fake vendors or bogus operational expenses. It turned out Alex had been systematically bleeding my company dry to finance his mother's and his lover's extravagant lifestyle. They had bought jewelry, designer handbags, and even made a down payment on a luxury condo, all with my money. But the most staggering discovery was at the bottom of the pile. I found a passport in Jessica's name. When I opened it, I was shocked to see that her last name was not Davis, but something else entirely. In the marital status column, one word was clearly printed: married. And even more insane, tucked inside the passport was an old photograph. It was a picture from a civil wedding ceremony dated 5 years ago, long before Alex had ever met me. The groom in the photo was Alex. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Jessica wasn't his adoptive sister, or some distant cousin, or even a new lover. Jessica was his wife. They were a married couple who had infiltrated my life under the guise of family. Alex had married me for the sole purpose of stealing my fortune, while his true loyalty, his true love, had always been with Jessica. I felt a wave of nausea, realizing how foolish I had been for 3 years, letting that woman live in my home, treating her like my own sister. James immediately began photographing every single document, placing the most crucial original papers into his briefcase. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a car engine in the driveway. Alex was back, far sooner than expected. We heard the front door open, followed by his heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. James's face went pale. There was no way for him to get out the front door without being seen. I quickly motioned for him to hide inside the large wardrobe in the corner of the office, which was used to store Alex's old coats. James ducked inside just seconds before the office doorknob began to turn. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, desperately trying to compose my face into a neutral expression. The door swung open. Alex stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What are you doing in my office?" he asked, his tone sharp. "How did you get in here?" The door was locked. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to burst from my chest. Cold sweat trickled down my back. I forced a smile, a vacant, confused smile. I heard voices. I answered weakly, whispering, telling me to come in here to find you. I was lonely and scared to be by myself. I played the part of a wife losing her grip on reality with everything I had. I stumbled toward him and clung to his arm, whimpering like a small child seeking protection from the evil voices in her head. The suspicion in Alex's eyes slowly faded, replaced by a look of horrific satisfaction. He saw my disheveled appearance and desperate dependency as proof that his drugs were working perfectly. He smirked, patting my hair condescendingly. "There's no one here, darling," he cooed. He then guided me out of the office, completely oblivious to the fact that, just feet away, a lawyer was hiding in a closet, clutching the evidence that would lead to his utter destruction. As he led me out, Alex said softly that I needed to get ready because his mother would be bringing a special lunch soon to make sure I was strong enough for the afternoon meeting. I just nodded, steeling myself for the next act in this twisted play. The sun was high in the sky, its intense heat baking the city streets outside. Inside my house, however, the air felt cold and terrifying, as if an invisible storm was brewing in the living room. After James had successfully slipped out the back door with his briefcase full of evidence, I returned to my post on the sofa. I focused on my breathing, trying to calm the thunder in my chest that had yet to subside. I knew the next act of this twisted play was about to begin, and I could not afford to make a single mistake. My enemies, the people I once called family, were extraordinary actors. To win this battle, I had to be better. At exactly 12 o'clock, the front gate creaked open. A yellow cab pulled up, and Mrs. Davis stepped out. In one hand, she carried a stack of Tupperware containers, and in the other, a large handbag. Her face was decorated with a wide, beaming smile that would look utterly sincere to anyone who didn't know the rotten core of her heart. I watched from behind the living room curtain as she made her way up the path. I saw her pause on the porch to greet the calico stray I often fed. The cat meowed affectionately, rubbing against her legs. But Mrs. Davis simply nudged the animal away with a gentle kick, a fleeting look of disgust on her face before she rearranged it into a sweet expression and reached for the doorknob. I immediately sank back into my position on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow, my face pale and my gaze slightly unfocused. The door opened, and Mrs. Davis's cheerful voice filled the room. She greeted me with a cloying pet name that made my stomach turn. She came over, set her things on the coffee table, and sat right next to me. She caressed my cheek with a hand that felt both rough and warm, asking how her favorite daughter-in-law was doing today. I answered in a weak voice, telling her my head still felt heavy and the world seemed to be spinning exactly the script my husband's family wanted to hear. Mrs. Davis nodded with a look of deep concern, telling me it was normal to feel that way when I was sick. Then, she opened the containers. The rich, savory aroma of beef stew instantly filled the room. It was one of my favorite dishes. In the past, I would have been thrilled by this gesture, believing it was a sign of a mother-in-law's love. But today, that aroma smelled like death. I knew with absolute certainty that this lunch was a critical part of their plan. The shareholders' meeting was this afternoon, and they needed me to be in a state of utter chaos, hallucinating, incoherent, or at the very least, barely conscious so Alex could seize control. Mrs. Davis deftly got a plate from the kitchen and served up a steaming portion of the stew. The sauce was thick, the meat looked tender, But I was sure that hidden within that delicious-looking gravy was a dose of their forbidden drug, far higher than what was in the pills. She offered the plate to me, coaxing me to eat and get my strength up. She said she'd been cooking it since dawn, just for me, so my mind could be calmer and I wouldn't hear any more strange voices. Her sweet words were like the hiss of a deadly snake. I stared at the plate, my mind racing. I had to find a way to dispose of this food without being caught. I couldn't refuse it outright. Mrs. Davis would surely force me, probably even try to feed me herself under the guise of caring for me. An idea sparked. I clutched my stomach and grimaced in pain. I told Mrs. Davis I felt nauseous and couldn't possibly eat in the stuffy living room. I asked if I could eat on the back patio to get some fresh air so I wouldn't throw up. Mrs. Davis hesitated for a moment, her eyes scrutinizing me, but she eventually nodded. She even offered to get me a cold glass of water from the kitchen. I didn't waste the golden opportunity. The second her back was turned, I rushed to the glass door that led to the patio. There, the calico cat she had shooed away earlier was sitting patiently, waiting for scraps. With trembling hands but swift movements, I dumped the entire contents of my plate into the cat's food bowl in the corner. The starving animal immediately began to devour the stew. I scraped my plate clean, leaving just a few smears of sauce on the edges to make it look like I had eaten with gusto. I then sat down in one of the wicker chairs on the patio, regulated my breathing, and put on a contented, full-bellied expression. Moments later, Mrs. Davis returned with a glass of water. She smiled widely when she saw my empty plate. Her face radiated a satisfaction she couldn't hide. She praised me for eating so well and said the medicine in the stew would surely start working soon to cure me. I just smiled faintly, confirming her words in my head. The medicine would work, yes, just not on me. 15 minutes passed. Mrs. Davis and I sat on the patio, making small talk. She started asking questions about the safe in Alex's office, trying to pry information from me. Did I know the combination? I just played dumb and confused. Suddenly, our conversation was cut short by a horrifying noise. The calico cat, which had just finished the stew, suddenly leaped high into the air as if it had been electrocuted. It landed awkwardly, then began to sprint blindly around the patio, crashing into the wall, flower pots, and chair legs. The cat's meow turned into a long, heart-wrenching shriek, a sound of extreme pain and terror. Its eyes were wide and wild, the pupils dilated until they consumed nearly the entire iris. The poor animal spun in frantic circles, chasing its own tail, before it collapsed, convulsing violently on the stone tiles. White foam frothed at its mouth. The sight was so shocking, so grotesque. Mrs. Davis screamed and jumped onto her chair, her face ashen. Her eyes were locked on the dying cat, her body trembling uncontrollably, not just from shock, but from the horrifying knowledge of what she was witnessing. She knew that the violent reaction the cat was having was meant for me. The dose she had mixed into the stew was lethally strong, far too powerful for a small animal, and likely for a human too. Fear flooded her heart. What if I had eaten it and died, right there on the patio? Their entire plan would be ruined, and they could be charged with murder. I remained seated, looking at Mrs. Davis with a mask of feigned innocence. I asked in a confused tone why the cat was acting so strange, as if it were possessed. I even started to get up to approach the cat, which was now only twitching weakly, and said that maybe it had eaten something poisonous outside. My words struck Mrs. Davis like a physical blow. She scrambled down from her chair and yanked my hand, pulling me away. "It probably has rabies," she shrieked. "We need to get inside, now." Back in the house, Mrs. Davis was a nervous wreck. She kept glancing at the clock, then looking at me suspiciously, waiting for the drug's effects to kick in. But I just continued to act sleepy and weak, not convulsing or raving like the cat. This confused her, but she didn't dare ask why. Maybe the effect is different in humans, she probably thought, trying to calm herself. A short while later, Alex and Jessica came home. Alex strode in confidently, wearing an expensive suit he'd bought with my credit card. He looked at his mother, and she gave him a slight nod, the signal that her mission was complete. A satisfied smirk spread across Alex's face. He came over to me, stroked my head, and said it was time to get ready for the office. He told me I only needed to attend the meeting as a formality and that he would handle everything if I didn't feel up to speaking. I obeyed without a word. I let Jessica help me pick out an outfit. She deliberately chose muted, drab colors and arranged my hair to look slightly unkempt, ensuring I would appear even more neglected and unwell in front of the investors. I watched my reflection in the mirror as she fussed over me with a mocking smile. In the glass, I saw the reflection of a warrior, ready to draw her sword. I let them dress me up like a broken doll, because the more shattered I appeared now, the more dramatic my resurgence would be later. As Alex took my arm to lead me to the car, I glanced back toward the patio. The poor cat was no longer moving, an innocent victim of my husband's family's cruelty. I made a silent promise. That cat's suffering would be paid back in full, today. The journey to the gleaming office tower in Midtown Manhattan felt agonizingly long. Inside the plush interior of the luxury sedan, the silence was heavy and thick with tension. Alex sat beside me, his hand gripping mine tightly, playing the part of the world's most protective husband. Yet, I could feel the cold dampness of his palm, the fine sheen of sweat that betrayed his nerves. He was anxious, but also buzzing with a dark excitement. In the front passenger seat, Jessica kept glancing into the rearview mirror, exchanging loaded, triumphant looks with Alex. Mrs. Davis had stayed behind, still too shaken by the incident with the cat, preferring to await the news of their victory from the comfort of our home. The car glided to a stop in the building's private circular driveway. I let my body go limp, dragging my feet as Alex helped me out, making me lean heavily on his arm. The employees and security guards who greeted us stared with a mixture of pity and discomfort. It was clear the rumors about my deteriorating mental state, so carefully planted by Alex and his accomplices, had taken root. They saw their once poised, decisive boss now looking like a lost soul, with a vacant stare and clothes that were just a little disheveled. It was all the confirmation they needed that I was no longer fit to lead. Alex guided me toward the exclusive executive elevator. Inside the polished steel box as we ascended, he leaned in, his voice a low whisper in my ear. He told me to stay calm and that I didn't need to say a single word at the meeting. Just sit there and nod if anyone asks you a question, he instructed. He also informed me that a private doctor would be waiting in the boardroom, ready to give me a vitamin shot if I started to feel dizzy. I knew exactly what that vitamin shot was. A high-dose sedative designed to knock me out instantly if I dared to deviate from his script. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor. We walked down a thickly carpeted hallway toward the main boardroom. Standing guard outside the massive double doors of polished mahogany was a man in a white coat, whom Alex introduced as Dr. Miller. He carried a medical bag and gave me a cold, appraising look, like a butcher sizing up a piece of meat. "Doctor." Miller nodded at Alex, signaling he was ready with his equipment. I simply lowered my head, hiding the fire of rage that burned in my eyes. The boardroom doors swung open. The blast of cold air conditioning and the aroma of expensive coffee hit us. Seated around the immense oval table were a dozen serious-faced individuals. These were the shareholders, the board of directors, and the heads of our key divisions. A hush fell over the room the moment we entered. Every eye was on me. I saw looks of concern, but also looks of thinly veiled contempt. With an air of complete confidence, Alex led me to the president's chair at the head of the table. Then, he took the seat to my right, the position normally reserved for the vice president. Dr. Miller settled into a chair in the corner of the room, on high alert. Alex opened the meeting, his baritone voice resonating with authority and false empathy. He began by thanking the shareholders for their attendance. Then, with a face artfully arranged into an expression of deep sorrow, he began to detail my failing health. With great regret, he announced, he had to inform them that his beloved wife, Emily, had been experiencing severe mental health disturbances. He threw around complex medical terms, weaving a fictional tale of my hallucinations, paranoia, and emotional instability, all of which, he claimed, posed a grave danger to the company if I remained at the helm. Whispers rippled through the attendees. A few of them nodded, as if confirming the rumors they had already heard. Alex pressed on, saying that to save the company from ruin, he, as my legal husband and closest guardian, was offering to temporarily assume all of my authority and voting rights through a legal conservatorship. Jessica, who had taken a seat with the administrative staff, began distributing copies of the forged medical documents and the draft of the power of attorney that needed the board's approval. Alex then turned to me, his gaze an intimidating mix of a soft smile and a hard threat. He asked the room if anyone had any objections or if they wished to hear a few words from me, though he doubted. He added that I could speak coherently. One of the older board members, a man who had been fiercely loyal to my father, raised his hand and requested that I be allowed to speak. A flicker of tension crossed Alex's face. His hand subtly signaled to Dr. Miller in the corner to get ready. He pushed the microphone closer to my mouth and whispered, so only I could hear, "Tell them you agree, darling, or the doctor will give you that shot right now." That was the moment. I lifted my head. The vacant, cloudy look in my eyes vanished, replaced by a gaze that was sharp, clear, and blazing with authority. I straightened my back, shedding the sick, slumped posture I had been feigning. I brushed Alex's hand away from the microphone and took control of it myself. The sudden, dramatic transformation made Alex physically flinch. Dr. Miller, who had started to rise, froze in place, pinned by my piercing stare. I opened my mouth, and my voice rang out strong, steady, and utterly sane. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," I began, my tone polite but dripping with dignity. "Thank you for your concern regarding my health. However, I need to correct a fatal error in the information my husband has just provided." I paused, letting the tension in the room build to a breaking point. Alex started sweating, his face draining of all color. He tried to interrupt, shouting that I was delusional, but I held up a hand, a gesture of command so powerful it silenced him. "I am not insane," I continued, my voice echoing off the walls. "I am not sick. I am not hallucinating. And I am fully aware of everything that is happening in this room. What you have been led to believe are symptoms of mental illness are, in fact, the results of a systematic attempt to poison me with illegal psychotropic drugs." The boardroom erupted. Shareholders looked at each other in stunned disbelief. Alex leaped to his feet, panicking, screaming that I was having an episode and that Dr. Miller needed to restrain me immediately. The doctor lunged forward with his syringe, but before the needle could touch my skin, the boardroom doors burst open with tremendous force. James entered, flanked by 2 uniformed NYPD officers, and right behind them, Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager. I rose from my chair, my eyes locked on Alex, who was now trembling with fear. "I'm not the one who needs a doctor, Alex," I said, pointing directly at my husband. "You're the one who's going to need a lawyer." Then I turned to the stunned board members. "And all of you," I announced, "are about to see who the real parasites eating away at this company are. James, if you would, please start the projector." The large white screen behind me slowly descended. Alex made a desperate dash for the laptop connected to the projector, but his path was blocked by the police. He was cornered, trapped in the web he himself had woven. I allowed myself a small, cold smile of victory. This meeting was indeed a final act, not of my downfall, but of the end of my husband's rotten charade. The projector hummed to life, ready to display the truth that would destroy him forever. The hum of the projector was the only sound in the dead silent boardroom. In the stark white light, a silhouette of me stood tall and unmoving. Alex, trapped between the 2 police officers, could only watch, his face a ghostly white. He wanted to scream, to stop this, but his throat was tight, his tongue thick and useless. Beads of sweat, large as pearls, rolled down his forehead, soaking the collar of his expensive shirt. He knew what was coming. I gave a slight nod to James, who stood by the laptop. He pressed the play button. The first thing on the screen was the crystal-clear security footage from the restaurant. The shareholders, once uncertain, now leaned forward, their eyes glued to the screen. They watched the moment I left the table, and they saw the warmth drain from Alex's face, replaced by a chillingly focused expression. They saw him snatch my purse, dump my supplements, and replace them with the poison pills. The image of the loving husband he had so carefully crafted was incinerated in seconds, revealing the cold-blooded con artist beneath. The video zoomed in on Mrs. Davis, her body shaking with silent, mocking laughter as she pantomimed a madwoman. It showed Jessica, patting Alex's shoulder with pride. The silent footage screamed louder than any words, a testament to their vile conspiracy. A low growl of anger and disbelief rumbled through the room. Alex found his voice, a desperate, cracking sound. "It's a fake!" he yelled. "It's a deep fake! She paid someone to create this, to frame me!" But before his lies could take hold, I had James play the next file. It wasn't a video, it was an audio recording. The unmistakable sound of Alex's voice filled the room, arrogant and gloating. The board listened to him and Jessica celebrate their plot, heard him brag about having me committed, heard Jessica fantasize about a European vacation on my dime, and her impatience to officially become his wife. Their own words, their own voices, convicted them. Jessica, sitting in the back, buried her face in her hands, her body racked with silent sobs. Next, James projected the financial records. Slide after slide showed the irrefutable proof, hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned from my company into their personal accounts. Purchases of jewelry, luxury cars, the down payment on a condo, all stolen. Finally, the last slide appeared. A high-resolution scan of Jessica's real passport and the photo of her and Alex's secret wedding. The ultimate betrayal. The man who claimed to love me was a bigamist and a thief who had used me as a cash cow to fund his secret life with his real wife. Alex's world imploded. His legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair, his eyes vacant. He looked for an escape, but the doors were sealed, the police unmoving. He glanced at Dr. Miller, but the crooked doctor had already been quietly detained by security. Alex was utterly and completely alone. An elderly board member slammed his fist on the table. "Traitor!" he roared, his finger shaking as he pointed at Alex. "Fraud!" The room erupted in a chorus of condemnation. Hysterical, Jessica started screaming that she was just following Alex's orders, throwing her husband under the bus in a pathetic attempt to save herself. I watched the chaos unfold, feeling not joy, but a profound sense of relief. I walked slowly toward Alex. The police parted to let me pass. I stood before him, an imposing figure of justice. He looked up, his eyes pleading, searching for a trace of the love he could still manipulate. He reached for my hand, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Emily, forgive me. My mother," she pressured me. "I love you. I really do." I snatched my hand away in disgust. The curtain had fallen on his performance for the last time. I leaned in close, my lips almost touching his ear, and whispered something only he could hear, something that made his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated terror. "The game isn't over yet," I murmured. "Remember that bottle of water you drank in the car on the way here?" A single tear of understanding and horror traced a path down his cheek. I stepped back and spoke, my voice loud enough for the officers to hear. As a dutiful wife, I couldn't bear to see my husband so thirsty. So, I prepared a special vitamin for him in his water this morning, the very same vitamin you've been so kind to give me. A new kind of panic seized him. He clawed at his throat as if he could physically expel the poison now coursing through his veins. The drug took hold with terrifying speed. "It's hot," he gasped, ripping at his tie. "So hot." His vision began to warp. My face seemed to elongate, my eyes glowing like hot coals. The faces of the board members twisted into demonic masks with dripping fangs. The long conference table began to writhe like a giant snake, coiling around him. The floor beneath his feet buckled and swayed. "Demons!" he shrieked, leaping from his chair and crashing into an officer. "They're here for me! She's a witch! She summoned them!" The board members recoiled in horror, watching a man lose his mind in real time. He scrambled on the floor, babbling incoherently, confessing everything: the poison, the money, the affair, all while screaming at invisible monsters only he could see. It was a perfect, horrifying irony. He was acting out the very script of madness he had written for me, in the exact time and place he had planned for my demise. The police finally managed to wrestle him into handcuffs as he thrashed and kicked, screaming that they were dragging him to hell. As they hauled him from the room, he twisted back for one last look at me. In his hallucinating eyes, I was bathed in a blinding white light, an avenging angel signing his death warrant. A long, desperate scream echoed down the hallway, the final sound of a man who had lost everything. The doors closed, and silence fell. Javier placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. I smiled faintly, then turned my gaze to Mr. Thompson, who stood in the corner. He gave me a nod of profound respect. My physical battle was over, but I knew the fight to rebuild my life and my company was just beginning. But for the first time in years, I was free. The real poison had been expelled from my life forever. The chaos in the boardroom slowly subsided. I addressed the stunned board, apologizing for the drama and assuring them that a full audit would begin immediately. My strength and professionalism instantly restored their faith. Meanwhile, across town, Mrs. Davis was relaxing on the sofa, sipping tea and dreaming of new diamonds, when a thunderous pounding rattled her front door. It wasn't a guest, it was the police. When she opened the door, her world crumbled. The officers presented a warrant, informing her she was under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. During their search, they found the stolen jewelry, the leftover sedatives, and, in the kitchen trash, the empty container of rat poison next to the remnants of the cat's final meal. She was dragged from the house in handcuffs, past the gawking, judgmental eyes of the neighbors she had always tried so desperately to impress. Her obsession with status had led to her ultimate public humiliation. 1 month later, I sat in my office, the morning sun warming my back. I reviewed the final report from James. Alex was sentenced to 12 years, to be served in a high-security prison psychiatric ward, forever tormented by the demons of his own making. Jessica received 8 years. The pampered princess was now working in the prison laundry. Mrs. Davis got 5 years, but her real punishment was a life of destitution and shame, her luxury home auctioned off, her assets seized, abandoned by everyone. I closed the file. Justice had been served. That afternoon, I drove back to the restaurant where it all began. Mr. Thompson was waiting for me at table 12. I didn't bring him money. I brought him the deed to the restaurant. I had bought the controlling shares and was making him the new managing partner. Tears welled in his eyes as he accepted. He hadn't just saved me from poison. He had saved me from a poisoned life. We raised our glasses of orange juice in a toast. To new beginnings, I said, and to the good people who show up just in time. Later, as I walked to my car, the afternoon breeze felt like a caress. I looked up at the clear blue Manhattan sky. The ghosts of Alex, Jessica, and Mrs. Davis were finally fading into nothingness. I started the engine, turned up my favorite music, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Mr. Thompson waving. I smiled. A new chapter was beginning. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I was not lonely. I had myself back, whole and unbroken, and that was more than enough.